some mordhau. Hey guys, I'm Nathan from Arms and Armour. Today I want to talk to you about the mordschlage, right? Hitting someone with the hilt of your longsword, as is described in a bunch of period sources. Now, this is interesting because there's just a really cool video on the HEMA Harness Fectin Facebook group put together by the HEMA Fight Breakdown guys, where they tested the mordschlage against a mitten gauntlet, where they're hitting the gauntlet, and I've got a link in here. I think it's good stuff. And you know, the guy was fine, right? Which is good. I'm glad it didn't hurt him. And the question is, what does this tell us about the mordschlage, right? This particular strike that we see in these historical fight books. Right? I think it doesn't tell us very much about it. And this is in part because I've done a bunch of tests on armor with different impact weapons. And it looks to me like the way that hitting someone with the pommel or the crossguard of the sword functions is very similar to hitting someone with a pole hammer or an axe, right? They usually don't destroy the armor, right? And depending on the type of armor that someone's wearing and what the context is, it may not harm them at all, which doesn't mean that the technique definitely doesn't work. Double negatives, right? What it means is that there's a context in which this should be used. So when you fight in armor, when I do, I take to heart something Bob Charette told me, which is you should look at the other person's armor and determine what their weaknesses are, right? So, you know, Danzig says, mordschlage them to the gauntlet. Maybe, right? If someone's wearing super protective mitten gauntlets, I'm probably not going to attack their hand with the mordschlage because it's probably not going to hurt them, right? But if they're wearing some of the other styles of gauntlets that were popular and widespread at the time, right, where their fingers are exposed, I totally might hit them in the hand with it, and it has a good chance of breaking their hand, right? Additionally, maybe you're not just hitting them on the top of the hand, right, but you're hitting them on the top of the wrist or down in the top of the hand, down inside of their hourglass gauntlet, right? If you can strike down in like that, it's gonna suck. It's gonna hurt, even in a big hourglass gauntlet, right? So there's all kinds of ways and variabilities that impact whether this really works, right? So we'll look at this in terms of these historical gauntlets here now. Your hand from getting cut primarily, and it deflects some force from that. You can see this awesome, beautiful articulation in this thing. It's incredible. I love this gauntlet. The second thing, right, is that your fingers are quite exposed. This may initially have had some little scaled fingers. It may not, right? They happened both ways. If you got hit wearing this kind of a gauntlet, you'd be much more likely to be harmed than if you're wearing a heavy, you know, mitten gauntlet of modern construction with overlapping lames that go the whole way down, right? That's just true. Now, there were bigger gauntlets then as well, and if someone was wearing one, you probably shouldn't try to smash their hand with a mordhau, right? It may not work. Even so, if you're holding another weapon, hold on, like this warhammer, right? If I am struck here while I'm holding this, I think it has significantly, you know, you have this mass that's interacting backwards, especially if you have two hands on the thing. I think there's more pressure that could hurt you. So that's one little thing, right? This gauntlet is a very high status, super elegant piece of armor for war, right? That I think would be susceptible to damage from an impact weapon. All right, let's look at another one. This guy's a little later, right? So this is an articulated gauntlet with scaled fingers. The leather has obviously been replaced at some point on this, probably Victorian period redevelopment. This gauntlet weighs maybe 4 ounces. It's very lightweight, it's very thin. Right? It prioritizes mobility over, protection at all costs. Right? These fingers help your finger not to get cut off, but they wouldn't do anything to prevent your finger from being crushed. If you're holding a weapon and you are targeted, you're going to get broken fingers. Right? It's just going to happen with these kinds of gauntlets, which were very popular. This is an hourglass demi-gauntlet that is earlier than the other two, right? That protects the top of your hand. It does not protect your fingers at all. And these were very common historically, right? At least as common as the kind of full mitten articulated gauntlets that we see a lot today in HEMA and Bohurt. Right, these prioritized mobility over making sure that your pinky finger didn't get broken. And as you can see inside of this thing, this also only weighs a few ounces. It's very light. It's very thin because you're moving your arms around, right, all day. So these have substantially less protection against the kind of attack against the hand that you would see with a mordhau. So here I have my sharp longsword. It's reasonably sharp, it's historically sharp. There are also some comments to the video that said, there's no way you can hit someone with a sharp sword, but you totally can holding onto the blade. Don't slide your hands up and down the blade. But I'm gonna hit this armor and we'll see what it feels like compared to other impact weapons I've hit it with. I hit that pretty hard. I'm gonna try it with the crossguard. Yeah, this hits like any polearm hits, right? Did it utterly destroy that? No, right? Did it put a bunch of tension on it? Yeah, if I did it a bunch or hit it in the right spot, would it break the articulation and make some dents in it? Yeah. Would it concuss the person in it? Maybe, right? Depends how I did it. I didn't get cut, right? It's a sharp sword. It's sharp enough that I'm not gonna run my hands over it a lot, but if you hold on to it, you'll be okay. If it's a razor blade, I wouldn't hold it like that, but most medieval swords were probably not razor blades most of the time, in particular if you're fighting people in armor. Another issue that's going on here is the idea that since the mordhau didn't hurt his hand that much in that context, this must not be a real use of the sword. And I think, in fact, actually, that using the sword in that manner is very similar to using another polearm that we know, other polearms that we know were used to fight people in armor and that were effective, right? The pommel of that sword weighs a little bit less than this hammer, but not a lot. The pommel and the quillen together have about the same amount of mass as this hammer does. In fact, the sword has a longer shaft, right, that can generate more energy. Would hitting someone on the hand with this warhammer in that same context hurt his hand? I don't think so. Right? Does that mean warhammers are ineffective? No, it means that given that armor in that situation, it was not an effective way to hurt the armor. Right? What about this? Horseman's axe, right? With this long spike. Now, I've done tests with these hammers and this horseman's axe against reasonably historically accurate armors. You can check them out. They mostly slightly deform the armor, right? This spike can go between the lames in an armor, and it can help break that articulation, which he talks about a bit in his video. I think he misunderstands what's happening when you're attacking the articulation of an armor. You're not just trying to bend the lames, right? You're breaking the rivets, and you're breaking the strapping and the things that hold the whole armor together, which cause it to fall apart, right? So I'll show you an armor that I've busted up. So a bunch of you have seen this before if you've watched it. This is part of a pauldron. It is hardened, probably 18 gauge steel. This would have been very nice armor in period. And I've smacked it a bunch. You can see dents in the articulation. None of the lames broke, right? What happened when I hit this with impact weapons is rivets broke, and things like this stop broke off. This other section of the armor broke off, and the rivets were broken by weapons sliding down between the lames and putting torsion on this piece. So I'll show you the other piece that's not destroyed. These were made by my buddy Josh Davis from Davis Reproductions, who is, arguably the best. And so this is the entire piece. This is how the other one used to look before a series of videos in which I clobbered it with various impact weapons. Now, the only thing that's actually made a hole through this armor that I've tested was an English bill that's 8 feet long. And that was mostly because of the amount of force that you can put into an 8 foot long pole arm that just gets really moving. Shorter impact weapons, you're not going to develop as much force, right? They all weigh pretty close to the same amount if they're real weapons, right? So the head of this hammer, which is a replica of one that's in the Wallace collection, weighs a bit over a pound. The head, maybe 1.5 pounds, pretty similar to the hilt of a longsword. This horseman's axe, the head weighs less than a pound. It's pointy, right? But I've hit these armors, hardened armors with this pick, and it doesn't go through the armor. If it was unhardened armor, it does. With hardened armor, it does wedge in between the articulations. If I hit it going this way, right, with the articulations, it wouldn't do anything. If I hit it this way, where it goes in between the articulations, it damages it. And so, in the end, right, whether or not something's an effective weapon depends on its context a great deal. I think that there are contexts in which you'll want to strike your opponent with a mordhau to the hand, to the head, right, to the shoulder, whatever, depending on the kind of armor that they're wearing and the context, right? Like, that's how weapons work, right? It has to be an appropriate context for that to function. So as with most of these kinds of tests of armor and medieval weapons, if your questions aren't carefully thought through, then your test results aren't going to prove anything. And this is the same for a whole bunch of the videos that I've done, which, let's be honest, I'm just trying to sell people swords, and I'm interested in this stuff. But they mostly show that armor works really well. That doesn't mean that impact weapons don't work at all. Right? It means that the way you use them and the context in which you use them significantly determines how effective those techniques are. You know, when you fight someone in armor, there's some differences in their armor you can see, like what kind of gauntlets are they wearing? Do they have bezicues that block your ability to lay on to their mail, or do they have an open area, right? If they have bezicues there, I'm not going to try and lay on them with the point in the same way as I would if there is an opening. Likewise, if I'm fighting someone and I might mordschlage them, right? If they have, let's say, exposed, shoulders here without big pauldrons, they just have little spalders. If I can nail them right here through a couple layers of mail with the end of my crossguard, it's gonna hurt, which could give me a moment to work in des, right, instantly, meanwhile, to throw them, to arm lock them, right, to chuck them on the ground. So we're looking for momentary, ways to gain the upper hand here, which doesn't mean that it just kills them, right? Same thing with hitting them in the head with this. It may not do very much. It may jostle them, right? It gives you a chance if you're fighting with the sword, right? You come around and smack them, it might give you half a second to then get this point back in on them. Now, some other aspects of examining your opponent's armor are invisible, right? You can't see them. So one of the tests that I'm thinking about here is when we at Arms and Armor and Matt Easton and Todd of Todd Stuff, both at the same time did tests with rondel daggers on mail. And we had two very different results, right? So Matt and Todd were able relatively easily to force their dagger through mail, and the mail that I had, it was very, very hard to get through it. I think the difference was the mail, right? Or the particular link. If you're hitting someone and you're fighting, you cram your point into their mail, that mail link may hold or it may give, and you don't know, right? You have to explore the vulnerabilities of their armor while you're fighting them. I think that the mordschlage is a technique that's like that. So I show you a bunch of cool gauntlets today. I hit some armor with this, and I think the takeaway is that these kinds of experiments are fun. We should do them, and we should think about what they tell us and what they don't tell us. And if you want to see how different kinds of impact weapons hit nice pieces of hardened armor, I'll link the videos to this.